Hello, everyone. My name is Maisa Azab. I am the Executive Director of the North African Middle East Science Centers Network, NAMES. I have pinned our website URL and email address in the chat, so please visit our website and get in touch with us. And I also invite you to follow us on social media, on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and X. I would like to welcome you to the second webinar NAMES is organizing in collaboration with our sister regional science engagement network in Latin and South America, RedPop, to celebrate the International Day of Scientific Culture. So now I would like to introduce our moderator, Abdelaziz Al-Hijilan. Abdelaziz has a bachelor's degree in industrial engineering from King Saud University. He attended executive education programs in two of the most prestigious universities, Wharton and MIT. He joined Mishkat Interactive Center for Atomic and Renewable Energy in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia in 2013 as maintenance engineer. Within less than 3 years, he occupied several management roles that made him an expert in the field of science museums operation. In 2016, he was promoted to Deputy Executive Director, and after less than 4 years of joining Mishkat, he was appointed Executive Director. In addition to his role in Mishkat, Abdelaziz works as business development specialist and consultant for educational science-oriented organizations, and he has served as NAMES president from the autumn of 2018 to the spring of 2024, our longest term president. So Abdelaziz, please.
Thank you, Maisa. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening, good afternoon, good day. I'm honored to be moderating today's session, today's webinar. I think we're going to discuss a very interesting subject. Our themes today will be promoting a better understanding of the role of science in society, where two highly experienced professionals will be shedding the light on that subject and sharing their knowledge and experience within the years where we can all benefit from that. So without further ado, let me introduce our first presenter and first speaker, Professor Rana Dajani. Professor Dajani is a IDAN Global Fellow at Harvard Graduate School of Education and a professor of molecular biology at the Hashemite University of Jordan. Professor Dajani's area of expertise is epigenetics and biomarkers of trauma among refugees. She has introduced national and regional stem cell laws and presided over numerous scientific boards and United Nations councils, most recently as the president of the Society of the Advancement of Science and Technology in the Arab World. Professor Rana founded We Love Reading, a grassroots initiative that has established more than 8,000 locally run libraries in over 70 countries. Her 2018 book, Five Scarves Doing the Impossible, If We Can Reverse Self-Hate, Why Can't We Redefine Success? Challenge global policymakers to address ongoing inequities in education and employment, while also putting forward a new paradigm for measuring success in an evolving world. Science and social innovator will take us on a roller coaster of adventure to explore how to see beyond the obvious and how to be critical in positive flow.
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me? Thank you very much for inviting me to be here today and to share some of my experience and expertise in this very important topic. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. That's how we greet people from my part of the world, which means peace upon you all. I'm going to start by sharing, as a molecular biologist, we've been studying human evolution over millennia. And I believe at some point in the stage of human development and evolution, there were two groups of people. There was a group of people who sat around the fire and told stories. And there was another group of people that frowned upon those who were telling stories and accused them of wasting their time. But you can guess which one actually survived. It was the storytellers. So in the spirit of evolution and storytelling, I'm going to share a number of stories today as we go through and share my experience and expertise. And as you notice from the title of my talk, seeing what everybody sees but thinking what no one has thought, that's an exercise and homework for listeners to go check who said that. It's a Nobel Prize winner in physics. So those are some hints. But I use it as my mantra. And you're going to see this every time I look at something in a different and new way. I remember this because as humans, that's how we survived and thrived and flourished. And as scientists, or even anybody, that's how we can contribute to making a difference in our world. Really, the topic is actually very timely. I had published a chapter called Science, Islam, and Critical Thinking, Lessons from Museums, in an edited version of Science, Museums, and Transition. So I urge you to check out the book, read my chapter, and maybe other chapters. But what I'm going to share today, it will be found in that book for those who want to later go back and read in more depth what I'm going to share with you today. So there's a number of themes that I'm sharing of how we can involve science and society in different ways. And I'm going to start, first of all, by having role models and highlighting them. And I'm going to start with myself. It was very nice in being introduced by our moderator. However, sometimes I like to take control and say that I like to introduce myself and say I wear different hats, but I don't wear a hat, I wear a scarf. So I talk about my different scarves as roles in my life. And the first one is that I'm a mother. And second, I'm an educator. I was a school teacher for 10 years before I became a professor. And even as a professor, I'm an educator. And I think those two roles are the most important roles any human being can play because that's how you shape the future generations. My third role is that I'm a scientist, and I'll talk a little bit about what I do, but I study epigenetics of trauma and ethnic populations. My fourth scarf is I'm a social innovator, and I founded a program called We Love Reading. My fifth scarf, usually I don't tell people what it is, and I invite them to read my book, which was reviewed in Nature. And my book is another example of when we write about role models to share with our future generations and our societies, people who look like them, who dress like them, who speak like them, their own language, so that they can see themselves in those role models and not just show role models from other countries, other societies, and other cultures that don't necessarily look like us and behave like us. So it's more difficult to see ourselves in their shoes. And the book is also in Arabic. It's called Al-Awshih Al-Khams for those who want to read it in Arabic. But also, every lecture I give, every opportunity, I share role models from my own history, my own experience. And I choose to make those who come from my culture, again. And these are some of my role models across the world who all come from my culture, whether from Algeria, from Iraq, from Jordan, from Palestine, from Lebanon. And these are men and women, not necessarily older than me. Some of them are in my age or even younger. So your role models could come from anywhere around the world. And then to showcase these role models, right? If you want to bring society closer to nature, we need to show them as human beings, as normal people like your neighbor, and not as some very people in an ivory tower. So we had run actually, and I urge you to check this out on YouTube channel for Muslim science. And we called this program Science Connections. And I interviewed 10 different scientists in different stages in their career, male and female, who happen to be Muslim, to talk about not exactly what they do as scientists, but who they are as human beings, what got them interested in science, and then a little bit of what they do, how their work and research impact society, and what are some of the challenges they faced, so that they become real role models for future generations. As you can see from what I'm talking, I'm actually focusing in the role of science and society on the Muslim community, because that's who I am and that's where I come from. And I understand that society more than other societies. But since Muslims are around 2 billion people around the world, and not all of them are in Muslim majority countries, you have many, many Muslims in non-majority Muslim countries. And so what I am saying will be relevant to any society and any community as we go forward. So as I speak, I'll be sharing different links, different examples that you can go by yourself, either read them, read about them, or watch them and utilize them. Again, having, I'm sure everybody's familiar with TED and TED Talks, and you could do a TEDx about any topic. So these are also opportunities for scientists to engage with society and share their science in a simple, form that is accessible to the general public. And then there are different examples of podcasts or little reels and short videos. And I'm just citing a few, like Science Jum'ah, which is actually produced in the US. And it talks about how you can strike a balance between faith and science, interviewing different scientists and different people in society, stakeholders, to discuss what is the role of science in society. So that's number one. Role models are very important if we are to convey science and to the society and to understand the role of scientists in society. The second one is we need to portray in our conversations and dialogues all over the world, not just the well-known history and philosophy of science today, which is all Western basic. We need to introduce to our communities and societies the other philosophies and histories around the world that have contributed to science in different ways. Unfortunately, we don't. Usually science is portrayed as a very Western philosophy, and we all take it without thinking or asking questions about what about the contributions of others. So I want to just hint about and talk about Islam as a religion, because usually when science is mentioned, it is mentioned with no religion affiliation, no political affiliation, when that can be so far from the truth. Nothing exists in a vacuum. And so in particular, because of Muslim communities, I want to emphasize how in Islam, science is fundamental to being a Muslim or to practicing Islam. Because in the Quran, which is our holy book, there are so many verses that call to the different roles of humans within the universe, within that we exist in, within nature, on how we where we are in this universe. So first of all, that we are here to serve the universe. Now, compare it to the philosophy that is the West, which is the humans are central and nature is there to serve them. That's a very different philosophy from our philosophy. Our philosophy as Muslims is that we are here to serve the universe, to take care of it, to keep the balance and the harmony. And this is very important to keep in mind. Then there are so many other verses that talk about using our minds and our brains to ask questions, to make observations, which is fundamentally the scientific method, right? To ask questions, to try to explain phenomena that we see. And then if it doesn't work, there are many verses that says you have to keep asking, keep trying, which actually fosters critical thinking. So being a good Muslim means you have to ask questions and be a critical thinker. And even more in Islam, if you are a judge and make a mistake, you get one reward, and if you don't make a mistake, you get two rewards. So anything you say or do, you will be given a reward, and this is so freeing because it's a license to keep trying, and it's okay to make mistakes, and that's very important for science. And when people understand that their religion as a society calls them to do that, that's how they appreciate science more. And that's why Quran in itself is not a book of science. However, it's a book of how to lead our lives where we are encouraged to become scientists, to ask questions, and to discover the laws of nature around us, and then to be ethical in how we use those laws. And there are many verses to talk about how to ask the question. So one of them is the story of Abraham asking God, can you please show me how you can bring back the dead? And God doesn't say that, no, you can't ask that question or you have to believe blindly. No, God answers and gives him an example that is based on physical evidence, which is the scientific method all over again. And so this understanding of religion, Islamic religion, that was understood and comprehended by society at that time, 1,000 years ago, produced all the scientists and the scholars that we learn about today, who established the basis of many of the sciences that we work with today, from chemistry to physics to medicine to mathematics. Even the internet is a result of Islamic scholars or scholars who existed within the Islamic civilization. And these scholars could be from different religions, by the way, Christian or Jews or Muslim. But it was the ethos of what does that mean to use your mind and brain and to question and ask questions and to be rewarded for asking questions. And the scientific method was discovered a long time ago by Ibn al-Haytham, 1,000 years ago, way before Francis Bacon and others who claimed that they were the ones who started the scientific method. And there's and of course we want to understand these and read these documents of our scholars from the past. And there's an institute in Goethe University in Frankfurt that actually has compiled all these, and this was sponsored by a Turkish scientist who compiled all the documents of these Arab philosophers who came from this civilization. They were not necessarily all Arabs, by the way, but they all wrote in Arabic. And one can go and look at the different inventions and recipes for chemistry, for physics, and so on. And I'm sure people have heard of the 1001 Inventions, which is a museum exhibit that has been traveling the world, showing and showcasing the achievements of these scientists so that we can correct the history of science. And one can look at even controversial issues today, which appear to be controversial in other contexts of religion, like Christianity and science, which were never controversial in Islam. And a prime example is evolution, which was already talked about by scientists and scholars as way back as the 8th century, as you can see, and even after Darwin. And so there's no contradiction between Islam and science. And this is very important to emphasize if we want society to understand what is the role of science in their everyday life, especially when we're talking about the Muslim society, and not to fall into the bias that there is a contradiction between religion and science. However, we also want to call out the biases in history. And here I'm going to mention a few. In many instances, I have been to events invited, even today in 2024, where people deny the existence of Islamic scholars. For example, in this event here, they were talking about the history of math, and they said from Pythagoras to the 17th century, nobody did any advancement of math, which was ridiculous, of course. But this is the ethos that's going on, and that's why we have to speak up if society is to appreciate what is the role of science and what is their role as a Muslim society in this, and not to be alienated. In Nature, there was the history of medicine published a few years ago, and also it jumped from Chinese and Indian history of medicine to European medicine, and it skipped all the Muslim contribution to medicine, when in France, 500 years ago, the Qanun, which is a book by Ibn Sina, was taught in Arabic to teach physicians in France how to practice medicine. So all this bias is very important to fix if we are to show how science and society can work together, because the Muslim community has to feel its identity and its dignity, and it feel that it is an equal contributor to what we are living today, and not as the Western society portrays, which is a remnant of colonization, which is still colonization of culture, that we as Muslims, like I said, the 2 billion of the world, did not contribute at all. And these are prime examples. And even last month, the journal Science, which is the topmost journal in science, published a special edition about remapping science to fix the bias in science history and to acknowledge other philosophers, other cultures as contribution. Yet, in the first sentence, they talk about the scientific method having its roots in the Enlightenment of the 17th century, when I just told you that the scientific method was already written down and explained in detail by Ibn al-Haytham 1,000 years earlier. And of course, I emailed them and told them you have to fix that mistake. And then we see it in museums. If you go to any museum, typically, you go up the stairs into the light, because the lighting is made on the top of the stairs, where they put the history of the European contribution to science. And then usually, all the Islamic history is put in the basement. Yeah, they may say it's about space, it's about whatever, but it gives, and it's a unconscious perception of what is important, who matters and who doesn't matter, and who really contributed. And these needs to be fixed. Now, the second point I want to talk about is, if we wanted to do better science and show how science is contributing to society, we need to collaborate with all our stakeholders, which include society, the government, the private sector, the media, and faith leaders. So how do you do that? First of all, we need to show in these different sectors that I mentioned that scientists are involved and are heroes. And I'll give a few examples from my research. So my research is in ethnic populations. So I go down and talk to those ethnic populations. In my case, the Circassians and the Chechens, who who were persecuted because of their religion, to southern parts of the globe. And by engaging them to understand their challenges and their problems, and studying their biology, their diseases, we were able to come up with solutions for them. And this was a true engagement between science and society, so that we would raise awareness to how science can play a role in making them have a better life in the future. And we even created short cartoons about our science to make it more accessible, and sharing the data we produced in the local language so they can access it and use it. We also worked with refugees, Syrian refugees, Palestinian refugees, and studying with them, explaining the science when we wanted to study how stress affects them, how they boost their resilience, and explained all the science to them, and then shared it back in their local language, even to the teenagers, and making them part of the research design and part of the data collection and part of the data analysis to be true to who they are and to raise awareness to science. And of course, all our work was actually published in Science. And then a movie was made about our work to raise more awareness for the general public, not just those Syrian refugees in Jordan, but also across the world. And this is now on PBS, actually, in the US, and has won multiple awards. But also, we wanted to bring a voice to the people, not just a scientist doing research with the people. We wanted the people to have a voice. And we did that when we were studying, for example, the role of fathers in bringing up their children. We made sure to take diaries from these fathers to really study what the fathers in our culture, Muslim culture, how they deal with their children, and not use the Western example and use that as a measurement stick, because that is biased, because fathers in different cultures do different things with their children. Maybe a father in the Netherlands would read a book, but the father in Jordan would go to the mosque with his child. So how do we make sure we capture the reality on the ground and not be biased? And then that would affect policymaking. And there are tools we have come up with and used, like fuzzy cognitive mapping, where we sit with the people and understand how they see different concepts of behavior, like empowerment, like life satisfaction. How does that mean within our own culture? And we've published these to help others understand. Then one thing we noticed is that in all science, people don't talk about religion. When in Muslim communities, religion is central in how we take care of our children, how we deal with stress and anxiety, how we are motivated to study, how we are motivated to do better, how we take care of our neighbors. Yet in all science that is coming from the West, we don't talk about religion. And that is not right, because science means to make observations. So we have to speak up and talk about this. And when we do, we engage more of society with us because they feel that they have a place in what's going on. Recently in Qatar, there was a bioethics conference that had never mentioned religion, but this time in 2024 they actually did, and it was so different because people suddenly felt that they belonged and they were engaged. And not just Muslims, by the way, it was Christians and Jews who suddenly were able to talk about the religion in the safety of an Islamic society where it's okay to talk about religion. So so what does that mean to be engaged more with science? And it's very important so that people can be engaged with science and don't refrain and pull away. And we need this so that the data is not all Eurocentric, but it also represents the people from different cultures around the world. But not just data for genomics, but even artificial intelligence. Usually the ChatGPT you use is built on databases and data sets that come from Western communities. So when they get exposed to other societies, these artificial intelligence have bias. I stood in front of the most advanced artificial intelligence in 2024, and they identified me as a nun. When I don't know how many nuns there are in the world, but I'm sure how many women put a scarf. I'm sure there's at least 500 million, yet I was identified as a nun. So we need to really, really engage and help people engage by sharing this. Even for patients and physicians who are part of society, we need to explain how science is part of that by sharing the ethics of using, for example, stem cells and how that's okay in religion. And that means we need to educate our faith leaders as well to what is science. And there are many programs that do that. Lastly, with the UN invoking the Sustainable Development Goals, this is a gateway to engage scientists and society to work together to solve the problems to reach the Sustainable Development Goals, whether it's through universities, through competitions, and then to involve the people to report on how they feel they are for the Sustainable Development Goals. And then to use education, right? How can, as museums and engagement, to use education such as service learning, which means to encourage our students to become journalists, to report and hold accountable journalists who talk about science to make sure that it is accountable. And there are other ways, of course, like drama and games and dancing and watching movies that can all help, or doing art that can all help engage society with science to make it accessible and easier for our students to be engaged. And then lastly, reading and having children reading aloud stories that have to do with science and our heroes in science. And I will end here by saying also we need to, in our museums, showcase how scientists have a role to contribute to social justice. So whether it's talking about Palestine and acknowledging our scientists who have been killed in the scholasticide and the genocide that is happening, or talking how Einstein said it is our role, it is not the evil in the world, but those who are silent. So to celebrate our heroes who talk about it. And this is for politics, for climate change. And as you said, to change the world, you need a lawyer, an activist, and a storyteller. And lastly, the World Science Forum in Budapest last week did a declaration showing that we cannot use science to harm, for example, AI for war or weapons for war, and we need to protect scientists from governments who attack them. And we can do this by boycotting and the role of scientists in doing that. So I will end. This is the book. That's the chapter. And those are the lessons that I shared with you to hopefully give you experiences and examples of how to engage between science and society to create a better future for future generations. Because everybody's special. Nobody's DNA is like anyone else. And you can contribute to make a difference because the ocean is millions of drops. And together we can make a difference through the chaos theory, be the butterfly of change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Dajani. I mean, it's always exciting to get the chance to listen to what you had to share. And I've been privileged to listen to you. And each time, I believe a session where Professor Dajani speaks is an eye-opener. And I'll make sure to read both books. I started searching the book to order it now, especially the 5 Scars. So that's great. Thank you so much, Professor Rana. Our second speaker will be from the Red Pop. So we've listened to Professor Dajani from the MENA region, so names region. So we'll go to the Red Pop region. Our speaker today is Professor Yuri Castelfranchi. Professor Yuri holds a degree in physics, a master's degree in scientific communication, and a PhD in sociology of science and technology. He is an associate professor at the Faculty of Philosophy and Human Science at UFMG, Brazil. He coordinates the Insight Observatory and the specialization course in public communication of science. He is a researcher at the National Institute for Public Communication of Science and Technology. Professor Yuri will be talking about science communication informed by evidence, learning from public perception of science.
Thank you very much. It will be very, very difficult to talk after this amazing, mind-blowing presentation by Professor Rana, because it was really very strong emotion to me to hear such incredible consideration. And so I'm doubly honored, and it's a very big pleasure to be here. And I thank the organization for inviting me. Besides being a scientist in the social studies of science area and the science communication, my research is also about science communication itself. So to try to understand what people actually do with science communication we do. So not only how to bring science to the people, but how to bring people into the science. And so I will try to show some things we learn from such kind of research. And so let me see, where is the arrows? Yes. So the first thing we know is that in most countries, both in the Western country and not Western country, public interest in science and technology and also trust towards scientists usually is quite strong. It's not low. So this idea that is a very big anti-science movement is not so true. And we see it in a lot of different world survey. So we saw that, for example, the science skepticism declined actually after the pandemics. There were pandemics, even if during the pandemics a lot of scientific disinformation was running on. But anyway, it was not always so high. So people who don't trust science never are the majority of people. So there are a lot of different research confirming this data. This is a world survey by the Wellcome Fund, and it was made also in the Middle East and North African countries. And you can see that trust towards sciences in the Middle East, for example, is quite high, as much as in Latin America. And you see also that trust towards scientists themselves is also quite high in the Middle East and North Africa. And always is a minority of people who say, I don't trust, I don't want to trust, I don't have confidence towards science or scientists. And this is an important ingredient to think our practice of science engagement, science communication, because we should understand that our publics are not our enemy, they are our allies, of course. They are trying to do with us our science communication. But of course, this trust and this atmosphere of trying to build something with science in our life has been increasingly undermined, both during socioeconomic crisis or wars, of course, and this information was designed to erode the confidence in institutions in general, not only toward research or technology. So in the academic literature, there are two models that try to describe which are the effects of the so-called anti-scientific movements toward the cultural authorities for science. And some people say that science today is like a lighthouse in the storm, so it is under attack. But other model says that actually the cultural authority of science in the world should be could be better described as a bungee jumping, in the sense that in a very specific moment of crisis, people tend to trust less in all the institutions and also in science. But the usually trust towards science and confidence towards scientists goes up again after most crises. So this is the better way actually to describe what happens, because we have a lot of data that show that even in USA, for example, in which during the pandemic, the wave of disinformation were very huge, actually trust towards science declined slightly, but never below 50% of people, never below 70% of people, and is already increasing. And in other countries, like in Latin America or in African region, remained high. So what can we extract as science communicators and science educators from the evidence of how people perceive and see science or represent scientists in their own mind? We have a lot of indicators today that say that the perception of people towards science depend on many different aspects. It's not monolithical. One person is not against science or pro-science. Everyone of us have some risk perception, different habits of consuming scientific information, different representation of what scientists are and do, a different knowledge of the institution or that do science or scientific literacy, different values and attitudes. And so they also have different level of trust toward such institutions that they know more or less well, and different kind of vulnerability to disinformation. But in general, we can say that people in most countries of the world are interested in science technology. They know that this is important for their own life and to insert them in their own wisdom and beliefs. But they have quite high risk perception of a specific kind of technology or developments. And we can know also that in most countries, we are going toward a reduction in gender inequality in science profession, but that persists very large disparities from the socioeconomic point of view, in the sense that science museum, scientific literacy is much more accessible to the higher strata of population from the socioeconomic point of view. And the impact of this information is visible, but it's not did not impact the majority of people. And the most important thing that we discovered in the last 20 years of this kind of research, and that attitudes towards science and technology are strong influenced not only by the level of knowledge that people have, not only by scientific research, by their own values, political orientation, and kind of religious experience. This is a very important factor, as Professor Rana also showed very well, because for a lot of time, science communication were thought as transmitting information in the head of the people. something like if context didn't matter, or local knowledge didn't matter, or belief and religious experience didn't matter. And for a lot of years, we made surveys and study to measure public communication science without having variables about this, about people values, people needs, people expectation, and people religious experience. And so this is changing, of course. And one thing that we discover when we have these other variables about expectation and politics and moral values of people is that the confidence and the level of appropriation that people do towards scientific information oscillates also depending on public policy, also depending on their general trust in their own institution, in their own government. So, for example, this is Brazil. The yellow bar is the percentage of people that think that science technology brings more benefit than risk. It's always very high, much higher than the other options, but it oscillates. And if you see the history of Brazil, it always oscillates, go down when people's confidence toward their own government, their own economy, their own social situation goes low too. And also the possibility for people to appropriate science and technology, to increase their scientific literacy and their own engagement, varies a lot depending on public policy. So, for example, when governments, like in Brazil, are interested and invest in public communication policy, people go much more to libraries, botanical gardens, science museums, etc. And when the government as one of their goals to destroy science and scientists, people also go down in their chances to appropriate science technology, to be engaged with it. So what can we do to foster engagement, literacy, and more of all, citizenship, scientific citizenship, the possibility to act inside and with the scientific environment? The first point is that we know today that improving the scientific literacy and informational literacy is very important, is necessary, but it's not sufficient. We also need a deeper understanding of what are the people's beliefs, concern, moral value, and expectation, because the way in which they receive and give meaning to science depend very strongly of this kind of factor and variable. As educator Paulo Freire said decades ago, one of the great sins of school in the West, at least, was to ignore everything that the child brings. The school decrees that there is nothing because of school. This has a strong impact on science communication tradition in the West. That was a science communication based mainly on transmitting basic facts of science, so basic theories, basic concepts, injecting in the head of people information without considering their previous knowledge and their previous attitude and their wisdom. So this was the very famous so-called deficit model or top-down model in science communication. And today in Latin America, we are moving on to models that integrate the very strong importance of dialoguing, of debating, or co-creating science communication with our public. They are not only the receiver of our science communication, but they are building it with us. And for example, in Colombia, the new policy, the new law for appropriation of science and technology see the communication and the popularization of science only as one part of the appropriation process, and says that science communication being science communication of science and technology in society, and this must be very strongly linked with the real transference and co-production of knowledge in connection with local experience and local knowledge, and that the very governance of scientific knowledge should be done taking into account this mechanism of real and appropriation and participation of people. So we moved on from a mainly transmissive point of view for popularizing science to a co-creation approach. The second point is that we learned from our research that science communication is not one thing. we should think it as an ecosystem. So like an ecosystem, we have frogs and oaks and fishes and mushrooms, and every one of us, science communicators, have a different role and different objectives, different goals in our science communication. So some of us do science communication to improve literature of people. Other one of us want mainly to empower people. Others try to catalyze more strong knowledge appropriation and use by people, and so on. And these are all legitimate goals, but they are different. So we need to use different techniques with different publics. We need to acknowledge the diverse ecosystem that provide diverse and different services in order to make this ecosystem function. So, for example, we could make a spectrum of popular science initiatives in which the frequency of the light is more or less the degree of proactivity of public. So traditional science communication practices like popular science books or science journalism are very important base of this ecosystem, but focused mainly in dissemination of information. So we are in the infrared frequency spectrum of proactivity of people. And the so-called engagement, public engagement practice needs of a stronger engagement, stronger proactivity of people, of the publics, but we also have the ultraviolet part of the spectrum in which actually we co-produce with people decision making, for example, with the Liberation Assembly, we make citizen science, we try to decolonize the science communication and science itself, and we improve the inclusion of local knowledge into science and science communication. This would need a very strong participation and inequality of position among scientists and their own publics, let's say. And the third point is that all this reflection and this data can be used to improve and inspire new novel forms of storytelling, of co-creation, and also novel strategies for public policy and campaign. So I will not enter so much into this because Professor Rana told this very, very well and very much better than I could. But I will focus in this point that usually scientists, when try to influence public policy, into their own government or into its society, his or her society, used to act in the Western country mainly as a neutral witness of the fact of nature. Actually, we discovered that this kind of role, of interpreting this role like in a theater script, is not always the best one. We know today that we have at least 4 types of scientists when they try to interact with policymaking. The science arbiter, the poor scientist that puts his white coat and say, I only give you the fact. The politician must decide what to do with this. But we are also in very important moment of science, especially when uncertainty is high and social and political moral values at stake. We also have 2 different roles for scientists to be this interface. The so-called honest broker, that do not try to pretend to be a neutral arbiter, and the issue advocate, the scientists who actually decided to enter into politics to defend something based on evidence. So to go into the conclusion, some main challenges for using scientific knowledge and for sharing science information and scientific knowledge is to have more and more public accessible international database with microdata accessible to everyone, with interface that help public policy to really use the data coming from science. So with policy paper written in a way that the public a politician can understand and can really use it. It's a usable science, and with campaigns and evidence-driven training for politicians and for journalists and so on. Storytelling can also change, of course, when we know that local wisdom, local knowledge, local experience are very important, but exactly in the way that Professor Rana already explained. So telling the story of scientists as humans, men and women, passionate about their work, coping with challenges and moral dilemmas, involving in their own religions as political position, telling the story of technology not only as a brilliant list of wonders or neutral wonders or in the main framework of the progress, but with all the risk, benefit, and moral dilemmas, and so on. And the last point is that what we learn more after 20 years of research is that when people enter into contact with science technology, they don't only receive it, they attribute new meaning, they recode science, they make reinvention, misuses, modulation, recombination. They adjust scientific knowledge to their own wisdom. They incorporate in their local knowledge and beliefs. And so they evaluate actively, not a passive receiver, the acceptability of risk. They reinvent new benefits of a technology, of scientific knowledge. So they are agents, not patients. They are not the victim of science and technology or the passive public of these beautiful wonders. They really participate in making science function, in making technology be something different. They mix scientific information with values, politics, aesthetics, goals. They make do it yourself and reinvent an object to make it serve another function. In a word, every person in the world, when entering into contact with scientific popularization or with science, act as a hacker, an epistemological, a technical, and a political hacker of science and technology. So in this sense, people disobey science and technology, but it's a good disobedience. Obedience is not a virtue when you are public or a scientific citizen. So to conclude, I use a lot this concept of trying to use science communication and science education to improve and develop scientific or techno-scientific citizenship. I know that citizenship is a very Western European and liberal concept, but I'm trying to reinvent a bit this concept, and to in the sense that being a citizen is not only having some right. Being a citizen means that you are part of. So if you want to improve a scientific kind of citizenship, that is very important because contemporary society are techno-scientific societies. So it's impossible to be a citizen if you are not also a scientific citizen. So you must be part of, belong to. So our science communication should not only transmit information, but should help people to be a part of science in a more or less direct way, but not only with some right to science, also with responsibilities. For example, how to confront disinformation as an individual, as a citizen. And if you are a citizen, you have some kind of power, of course, not only some kind of right, you have some kind of agency in influencing your social life, your social relationships. So if you want to make science communication really effective, we also have to reflect about how much power we accept to delegate to our publics, how much they can be empowered, also in the sense that they can take decisions that eventually we don't like as scientists. So power is a very important part of science communication to me. So some dimension and some aspect to take into account to do this, to involve a new scientific citizen, is of course to promote diversity, not only of race, gender, ethnicity, social class, but also diversity in the sense that science itself and science communication should learn from, do with, and create new knowledge as women in science, as African thinkers, and as indigenous intellectuals. So these other actors that historically were excluded from the Western history of what knowledge is, of what science is, and this also Professor Rana explained it much better than I, are crucial for science to develop, are crucial for science communication to function effectively. If we don't have the African epistemologies, the woman practice and experience in science with these obstacles and dilemma, the indigenous knowledge in Latin America, we don't have the chance to really improve and increase scientific citizenship. So to build a scientific citizen, we cannot only make scientifically literate citizens. We need to share power, we need to share decision making, we need to co-create science and data and their own interpretation together with different and diverse groups of people. That's all. Thank you very much. I apologize for my English, that is very mixed. I'm Italian, I learned Spanish, and after Portuguese, and now I live in Brazil. So my English is a strange mix in my brain of a lot of influences. And I thank you a lot to invite me.
If you allow me, I think we have some time to answer a couple of questions. So maybe the first question would be for Professor Rana. So the question, ethical guidelines should science communicators follow to ensure responsible and accurate communication of scientific information?
That's a very important question. Thank you for the person who posed it. I think for me, all these ethical decisions and issues should not be taken by one person. We should have committees that represent all stakeholders of society to take decisions and put guidelines on how science communicators behave, and to hold them accountable to those guidelines as they work through it. And these guidelines should also always be revisited, because science is always advancing, and we want to make sure that we are not missing the train, but actually getting on the train in time. So who would be part of that? There would be, of course, scientists themselves to make sure that the science is correct, but also you would have people from society who come from the private sector, from government, from religious, from media, so that when the science community conveys, he or she are making sure that they are respecting and following and navigating how to share science in a useful way to the wider society.
Thank you, Professor Dejani. Professor Yuri, we have another question, which is, what strategies can science communicators employ to build trust with the public, especially when discussing complex scientific issues?
Well, I should say two main different strategies. On the one side, we should stop thinking that if an issue is complex, then we must simplify. It's not only reducing the complexity that make people appropriate science. Usually is exploring the complexity. So you must open up the black box of a complex issues and show the parts of it. So never communicate science only from the point of view of the results. What do scientists do? What this technology is? But always say the how. How this woman in Jordan made this as a scientist. So always give to science a body, a person, a story, a problem, a doubt, an hypothesis, some errors, some tryings. Show the process of science, because if you show the process, science stop to being something up there in the very upper floor of the museum, in the light, in the full light, and goes down to an actual practice of actual humans. So this is very important to develop trust, to show science as a real human activity that normal people, well-trained, passionate, clever eventually, but they can do. So everyone can appropriate, understand science in this way. So not only say what, but also how, who, where, when, and with all the process that are beside the result. A lot of science journalists focus themselves only on the result. We discovered a new vaccine, discovered a new planet. This makes science something mysterious, magic. not real. So this is one point. And the second point is to make participation real. Engagement is not only to mobilize people to like science. Engagement means people actually participating of some part of the scientific process or of some part of the scientific debate. So for example, in Brazil, we made an experiment last year that was a citizen assembly on genetic editing, CRISPR. So genetic editing in Brazil today is a totally unknown issue in science. Politicians do not know anything about science, about genetic editing. They only know about transgenic, that is the old technology. And scientific journalists do not talk a lot about this, so nobody knows what it is. So we joined people, a nurse, a peasant of different religion, different part of the country, different kind of city and villages to discuss together. And it was amazing because we did not only explain genetic editing to people, we asked people to actually deliberate, try to formulate a decision that we sent to the government, to the Brazilian government. And we open a discussion with politicians and scientists to discuss what people are thinking that we could do with this. So I think that these are the 2 points. The storytelling should involve the actual bodies and process of science. This increase the trust because you see scientists as human, as your neighbors and your co-citizens, but also show to people that they actually can have a word, can talk about this, can deliberate, can have something to say that is important to science and to policy making.
Thank you, Professor. Time went by so fast. We've reached the end of our session today. Thank you, Professor Rana. Thank you, Professor Yuri. Thank you, our guests for joining us, and hope
Yeah, I think that the internet is not Abdelaziz's friend today, but anyway, I would like to thank you all again, and this, as I mentioned, this webinar is recorded and will be available on our website and YouTube channel. And I hope that we have a chance to continue the conversation in other occasions. Thank you again to Rana and Yuri and Abdelaziz. And well, have a good day for Yuri and Rana, who are in South America and North America. And good evening to the rest of us here. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care. Salam alaikum.